You may have been waiting, praying, believing for a miracle. You've been asking God to bring the right people, to open doors, to change circumstances. But what if I told you today that you are the miracle you've been waiting for? That what you're believing for is already inside of you? That heaven has already declared victory over your life? God did not create you to live in lack, to struggle, or to barely get by. He designed you with greatness in mind. There is a divine assignment over your life. And when God calls you a miracle, He is saying you have what it takes. You are chosen. You are anointed. God has placed a powerful promise inside of you long before you faced the challenges, long before you encountered the setbacks, long before you even knew what you were capable of. God already declared victory over your life. You were not created to struggle through life hoping for something good to happen. You were created with divine purpose, with a destiny filled with favor, blessings, and supernatural breakthroughs. Many people go through life feeling as though they are missing something, as though they need to find the right opportunity, meet the right person, or be in the perfect situation to succeed. But the truth is, everything you need is already within you. God has given you gifts, talents, and abilities that are waiting to be activated. His promises over your life are not distant hopes or far-off dreams. They are living, breathing realities that are already in motion. Look at the story of Moses. When God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses felt inadequate. He questioned his ability, his past, and even his speech. But God didn't call Moses based on what he lacked. He called him based on the promise He had already placed inside of him. And when Moses doubted, God asked, "What is in your hand?" It was just a staff, something Moses had carried for years without realizing its potential. But when he surrendered it to God, that staff became a tool for miracles. The same is true for you. God has placed something in your hand. Maybe it's a talent, an idea, a passion, or a dream that won't go away. You may not see the full picture yet, but God does. He sees the potential within you. He sees the strength, the faith, the resilience that you don't even recognize in yourself. And when you step out in faith, when you dare to believe in His promise, that's when miracles happen. The enemy would love to convince you that you're not enough, that you're unqualified, that you don't have what it takes. But that's a lie. God never makes a promise that He doesn't intend to fulfill. If He said you are victorious, then you are victorious. If He said you are blessed, then you are blessed. If He said He has a plan for your life, then nothing, no mistake, no failure, no delay can stop that plan from coming to pass. Too often we wait for everything to be perfect before we take action. We wait for the right time, the right opportunity, or for every question to be answered. But God says, step out in faith. The miracle happens in motion. The breakthrough comes when you trust that what He placed inside of you is enough. Think about David. Before he was a king, he was just a shepherd boy. He didn't have the experience, the title, or the resources to take down a giant. But what he did have was faith in God's promise. And with just a sling and a few stones, he defeated Goliath. Not because of his own strength, but because he knew the power of the promise that God had spoken over his life. So what about you? What promise has God placed inside of you? What dream have you been afraid to pursue? What opportunity have you been waiting for confirmation on? This is your confirmation. You don't need to wait any longer. You don't need anyone else's approval. God has already given you everything you need. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead lives inside of you. That means you are already equipped, already favored, already positioned for greatness. Stop looking at what you lack and start walking in the confidence that God has already declared victory over your life. It's time to activate the promise. It's time to step into your destiny. It's time to believe that you carry the power of God's promise and nothing can stop what He has planned for you. Sometimes in life we feel like we are stuck in the same place, facing the same struggles, praying the same prayers, and wondering if anything is ever going to change. It's easy to get discouraged when you don't see progress, when the door isn't opening, or when the answer isn't coming as quickly as you expected. But let me remind you today, your breakthrough is closer than you think. Just because you don't see anything happening doesn't mean God isn't working behind the scenes. Just because the situation looks the same doesn't mean things aren't shifting in the spiritual realm. Faith is believing before you see it. It's trusting that God is making a way even when everything looks the same. You might be one prayer away from the answer, one step away from the opportunity, one day away from the favor that changes everything. Think about the story of the Israelites when they marched around the walls of Jericho. God gave them a promise that the walls would come down. But He didn't tell them exactly when. He just told them to keep walking, to keep believing, to keep moving forward. For 6 days, they walked around those walls and saw nothing change. But what they didn't realize was that every step they took was weakening the foundation of that wall. Every lap around the city was bringing them one step closer to the breakthrough. And on the 7th day, after their obedience and faith, the walls came crashing down. What if they had stopped on the 6th lap? What if they had said, nothing is happening? This isn't working. We might as well give up. They would have missed their miracle. And the same is true for you. Don't stop believing just because you don't see movement. Your miracle is in motion. Your breakthrough is closer than you think. Many times, when you are closest to your breakthrough, that's when the pressure is the greatest. That's when the enemy works overtime to try to discourage you, to make you question if God really heard you, to make you doubt if it's ever going to happen. But that's a sign that you're closer than ever. Before a baby is born, the labor pains get the strongest right before delivery. The discomfort increases, the pressure builds, and everything in the natural looks like it's too much to bear. But that's the moment when new life is about to come forth. Your struggle is not a sign that God has forgotten you. It's a sign that something is about to be birthed in your life. Joseph went through years of disappointment, betrayal, and unfair treatment. He had a promise from God that he would be in a position of leadership, yet he found himself in a prison instead of a palace. But what Joseph didn't realize was that his breakthrough was already in motion. In one moment, God took him from the prison to the palace, from forgotten to favored, from overlooked to overflowing. He didn't see it coming, but it was already on the way. The same God who did it for Joseph is working in your life right now. You may not see it yet, but your breakthrough is closer than you think. The relationship you've been praying for, the healing you've been believing for, the opportunity that's going to change everything, it's already lined up. It's already written in God's plan for your life. Now is not the time to quit. Now is not the time to give up. Keep praying, keep believing, keep showing up in faith. The walls are about to fall, the chains are about to break, the doors are about to open. Your breakthrough is not years away. It's not in some distant future. It's closer than you think. Stay in faith, because God is about to do something big in your life. Faith is the key that unlocks the supernatural power of God in your life. When you step beyond what you can see, beyond what makes sense in the natural, and believe in what God has spoken, you activate something in the spiritual realm that cannot be explained by human reasoning. Faith is not just wishful thinking. It is the confident expectation that what God has promised, He will bring to pass. All throughout the Bible, we see that faith is what moves mountains, heals the sick, raises the dead, and opens doors that no man can shut. When the woman with the issue of blood pressed through the crowd just to touch the hem of Jesus' garment, she was stepping into the supernatural. In the natural, she had every reason to give up. She had been suffering for 12 years, spent all her money on doctors, and still had no cure. But something inside of her said, if I can just touch Him, I will be made whole. She didn't wait for the circumstances to change. She didn't wait for a sign. She reached out in faith. And in that moment, the power of God flowed into her body, and she was completely healed. That's what faith does. It reaches into the unseen and brings the supernatural into reality. Faith says, I don't have to wait to see it before I believe it. I believe it, and then I will see it. The natural mind wants proof, but faith doesn't operate by sight. The natural mind says, show me first, and then I'll believe. But God says, believe first, and then I will show you. When Peter stepped out of the boat and walked on water, he wasn't walking on logic. He wasn't walking on his own ability. He was walking on faith. The moment he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the wind and the waves, he started to sink. That's because faith operates beyond the natural realm. As long as Peter stayed connected to the supernatural, he did the impossible. But when he shifted back to the natural, he started to fall. The same principle applies to us. When we are walking by faith, we step into a realm where miracles happen, where the impossible becomes possible, where breakthroughs come out of nowhere. But when we start looking at our circumstances, our logic, and our limitations, we get pulled back into the natural. That's why the enemy's greatest weapon is doubt. If he can get you to doubt God's promise, he can keep you from stepping into the supernatural. Faith is not denying reality. Is choosing to believe that God's reality is greater than what you see. It's looking at your sickness and saying, by His stripes I am healed. It's looking at your lack and saying, my God shall supply all my needs. It's looking at your impossible situation and declaring, with God all things are possible. God is looking for people who will believe before they see. He is looking for people who will stand in faith even when everything around them says it's impossible. The supernatural is not just for certain people. It's for anyone who dares to believe. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. That means you have access to supernatural healing, supernatural provision, supernatural breakthrough. So the question is, are you willing to step out in faith? Are you willing to believe beyond what you see? Are you willing to trust that what God has spoken will come to pass? If you will dare to believe, you will unlock a realm of the supernatural that will take you further than you ever imagined. The doors will open, the breakthroughs will come, and the miracles will manifest. Faith unlocks the supernatural, so step out and watch what God will do in your life. There are moments in life when we face challenges that seem overwhelming. The obstacles feel too big, the opposition too strong, and the burden too heavy to carry. It's easy to wonder, why am I going through this? Why is this happening to me? But what if I told you that your challenges are not in vain? What if the very struggle you are facing today is the platform God is using to showcase His glory in your life? Throughout history, we see how God takes impossible situations and uses them for something far greater than we could ever imagine. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. It seemed like everything in his life was falling apart. But what Joseph didn't realize was that every trial was a step toward his destiny. God was positioning him for promotion. What looked like a setback was actually a setup for something greater. When Joseph finally stepped into his purpose as second in command of Egypt, he could look back and say, what was meant for harm, God turned for good. Your challenges are not there to break you, they are there to build you. Every difficulty, every hardship, and every delay is an opportunity for God to show His power in your life. If you never faced a challenge, you wouldn't know the fullness of God's strength. If you never walked through a storm, you wouldn't experience the peace that passes all understanding. It's in the toughest seasons that God's glory shines the brightest. Think about the story of Lazarus. When he became sick, his sisters sent for Jesus, expecting Him to come and heal him immediately. But instead, Jesus waited. From a human perspective, it looked like Jesus was late. It looked like hope was lost. But Jesus had a greater plan. He didn't just want to heal Lazarus. He wanted to resurrect him. He wanted to perform a miracle that no one had seen before so that God's glory would be revealed in an even greater way. Maybe you're in a season where it feels like things are delayed. You've prayed, but nothing has changed. You've believed, but the breakthrough hasn't come. Let me remind you, God is not late. He is working behind the scenes. Sometimes He allows the situation to become impossible so that when He moves, there is no doubt that it was His hand at work. Your struggle is the soil for your testimony. The very thing that the enemy thought would destroy you is what God will use to elevate you. The sickness, the financial hardship, the loss, the betrayal, none of it is wasted. God is weaving all of it together into a masterpiece that will glorify Him. The Apostle Paul faced immense persecution, shipwrecks, and imprisonment, but he didn't let those trials define him. Instead, he declared, when I am weak, then I am strong. Why? Because in his challenges, he experienced the supernatural strength of God. He understood that every difficulty was an opportunity for God's power to be made perfect. If you're in the middle of a struggle, don't give up. Keep trusting, keep believing, keep moving forward. God has not forgotten you. He is using this very challenge to take you to a new level. The doors that closed were for your protection. The disappointments were divine redirections. The battle you're facing is not the end, it's just the beginning of your testimony. Soon you'll look back and say, if it weren't for that challenge, I wouldn't have seen God's faithfulness. If it weren't for that struggle, I wouldn't have stepped into my purpose. Your pain has a purpose. Your trial has a testimony, and your challenge is being transformed for His glory. So stand strong, because God is working all things together for your good. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. The words you speak have the ability to shape your reality, to open doors or close them, to bring hope or despair. Every day you are either speaking life over your situation or allowing negative words to keep you bound. When you declare faith, when you speak God's promises over your circumstances, you activate His power in ways you may not even realize. It's easy to talk about what's wrong, to dwell on what's not working, and to rehearse the obstacles standing in your way. But if you constantly speak words of defeat, lack, and discouragement, you are giving power to the very things that are trying to hold you back. Instead of saying, I'll never get out of this struggle, start declaring, God is making a way for me. Instead of saying, I'll always be sick, start proclaiming, by His stripes I am healed. The Bible tells us in Ezekiel 37 about the valley of dry bones. God led the prophet Ezekiel to a valley filled with bones, lifeless, scattered, hopeless. But instead of telling Ezekiel to mourn over them, God told him to prophesy to the bones, to speak life into what looked dead. When Ezekiel obeyed, the bones began to come together. Muscle and flesh formed, and the breath of God filled them. What once seemed hopeless became a mighty army. That's what happens when you speak life over your situation. It may look impossible, but when you declare God's promises, you are inviting His power to bring restoration, healing, and breakthrough. Your words create an atmosphere for miracles. Think about David when he faced Goliath. Everyone around him was speaking fear. They were talking about how big Goliath was, how strong he was, how impossible it was to defeat him. But David spoke differently. He declared, the same God who rescued me from the lion and the bear will deliver me from this giant. His words were filled with faith, and because he declared victory, he walked in victory. What you speak in the middle of your battle will determine how you come out of it. Are you magnifying the problem, or are you magnifying God's power? Are you agreeing with the enemy's lies, or are you standing on the truth of God's word? Even Jesus demonstrated the power of spoken words. When He stood outside Lazarus' tomb, He didn't cry about how long Lazarus had been dead. He didn't talk about how impossible the situation was. He simply said, Lazarus, come forth. And with those words, life returned to Lazarus' body. What have you been speaking over your life? Are you telling yourself that you'll never succeed, that you'll never get out of debt, that you'll never meet the right person? If so, it's time to shift your words. Start speaking life. Speak favor over your job. Speak peace over your home. Speak healing over your body. Even if you don't see it yet, declare it by faith. When you wake up in the morning, say, today is going to be a great day. God's favor is surrounding me like a shield. Doors are opening for me. Breakthroughs are coming my way. When you go through challenges, don't speak defeat. Say, God is fighting my battles. No weapon formed against me will prosper. What was meant for harm, God is turning for my good. Your words are powerful. Use them wisely. Don't let negative thoughts dictate your speech. Instead, align your words with God's promises and watch as your situation begins to shift. Speak life, and you'll step into the blessings and breakthroughs that God has already prepared for you. There are moments in life when it feels like nothing is changing, like you've been waiting forever for a break. You've prayed, you've believed, but things still seem to be moving at a slow pace. But what if I told you that God has already positioned you for divine acceleration? What should have taken years is about to happen in a fraction of the time. What seemed delayed is about to come to pass quicker than you imagine. When God steps in, He doesn't follow human timelines. He doesn't check the economy, ask for permission, or wait for everything to be perfect. No, when it's your time, He will accelerate you into your destiny. He will open doors that no one can shut, remove obstacles in an instant, and take you to places you never dreamed of. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He spent years in a prison cell, falsely accused and forgotten. It seemed like he was stuck, like nothing was changing. But one day, one conversation with Pharaoh, and suddenly he was promoted from the prison to the palace. What had been years of waiting turned into an overnight promotion. That's divine acceleration. God is saying to you today, get ready. What has been delayed is about to be released. What has been stagnant is about to move forward. What you thought was impossible is about to become reality. Maybe you've been working hard, but the opportunities haven't come. Maybe you've been believing for restoration, but nothing seems to be shifting. I want you to know you are not forgotten. You have been positioned for something greater. Every struggle, every closed door, every season of waiting was not wasted. It was preparing you for what's ahead. God is about to breathe acceleration over your life. That means breakthroughs that don't take years but happen suddenly. That means relationships that come together effortlessly. That means promotions that don't follow the usual process. Favor that doesn't make sense, and blessings that seem to appear out of nowhere. Isaiah 60:22 says, at the right time, I, the Lord, will make it happen. God is not limited by what you see. He doesn't need permission to bless you. When it's time for your acceleration, no person, no situation, no obstacle can stop Him. But here's the key. You have to stay in faith. The enemy would love for you to get discouraged, to think it's never going to happen, to settle for where you are. But don't let waiting turn into doubting. Keep believing, keep expecting, keep speaking God's promises over your life. David was anointed king, but he spent years in the wilderness running from Saul. He could have given up. He could have thought, maybe I heard wrong. Maybe I'll never step into my destiny. But in just one day, Saul was removed and David stepped into his kingdom. You may feel like you're in the wilderness now. Maybe things don't look like they're shifting, but acceleration is coming. The people who overlooked you are suddenly going to notice you. The doors that were shut for years are suddenly going to fly open. The things you thought would take decades are going to happen in a moment. God has already positioned you. You don't have to force it. You don't have to strive in your own strength. Stay faithful where you are. Keep doing what He's called you to do. And at the right time, divine acceleration will take you further than you ever imagined.